Mai, ki tēnei hui. John's got his calculator. We're ready to go. We're ready to go. He's going to do all of the big budget numbers, punching it into the calculator as we go. So I just want to note that this workshop is public, and also just to kind of about timing, we are scheduled to run till 5 p.m. My goal is for us to be done, if we can, by 4 o'clock at the latest. So let's see, with your support, we can do it. So we're going to, it's sort of in two parts. I think it's two separate appointments, but it's not really that separate. But we will have probably a cup of tea break in between the two bits. And I think that was all the things I needed to say to kick things off. And then I go straight to Barbara.
Kia ora koutou. Welcome to, I think, our 27th workshop since November last year on the long-term plan. This long-term plan is being widely referred to by councils all around New Zealand, certainly chief executives that I talk to, as being one of the most challenging in our careers. And the reason for that, you know well. I think the good thing perhaps out of this is to know that we are not alone, and that in sharing what we're doing here with other councils, we're also learning about the kinds of initiatives that they're undertaking. So the whole sector is working together. Obviously, infrastructure deficits, significant inflation, increasing insurance costs of borrowing are all adding significant pressures across every part of our business. But the good news is, despite that, Standard & Poor's have rated us with the highest rating, AA+, of any local authority in New Zealand. And that is actually a reflection of the quality of our financial management. And I take a nod to our Chief Financial Officer and her team here. They have confidence in the work that we are doing with you, and they have confidence in the decisions that you are making along the way in order to ensure our finances continue to be in good health. So the purpose of this workshop is to update you on the intense work that we've undertaken as a team since the 9 November meeting, where decisions were made principally around the capital program, so that we could go away with some guidance from you and start work on the first draft budget. And we're also going to cover off the consultation requirements that commence in April next year. So we have made a lot of progress in this long-term plan process compared to previous long-term plans. We've started a lot earlier, and we're into the detail a lot earlier, which we need to be in order to get to where we need to go. So we're on track, but there's still a lot of work yet to do. So we'll be coming back to the committee for decisions on the budget in February next year, and I believe there is another workshop being scheduled for the very last day in January, the 31st of January, and everyone will be able to come into that re-energised, I hope, from some good recovery time over the summer. And from that, we'll be preparing the long-term plan consultation document, which is a document that also must be audited. So I'm now going to hand over to Andrea Reeves, our Chief Financial Officer, to take us through a presentation.
And Andrea, I understand there'll be sort of natural points where we can stop for questions.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
I will take, we won't do it as we go, but if you have a question, I'll take your name down and you tell me when we're at that.
Yeah. No problem at all. And just to note that the slides that are on the screen will be made publicly available. We're going to put them up on our website after the session. And we've also been asked to publicly release the KPMG reports that were completed as well. And those with suitable redactions will also be up on our website under this and available for you to peruse at your leisure. I'm going to cover a few parts, and the first part of today is the the where are we at before we progress into, so where have we landed in terms of our current estimates, in terms of our forecasts, and then further on to the options to reduce budget. As noted by Barbara and Rebecca, we'll also have a session on the consultation document. We'll pause, we'll hand over. You'll be sick of hearing my voice by then, so I'll hand that over to Baz and co at that point in time. So the purpose of today really is to give you an overview of the updated budgeting position and further options to reduce our budget further, and clarity around what those options are.
Just to let everyone know, I can't hear anything on this.
Okay, well, we will, I don't know why I'm answering. We're going to try and fix that.
Do you want me to continue?
Let's pause for a minute and see if it's an easy solution. Can you hear us now, Councillor?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Thank you.
Great. All right. We had only just started, so we are now going into the presentation from Andrea.
Yeah. So perhaps I need to know.
Sorry, can I just clarify, because I couldn't hear anything. Is this public or not?
Yeah.
Yes, it is public, and the slides will be uploaded to the website after this session.
Thank you.
And we just so you know, Diane, we're gonna try to not use all of the time we've got available, but there will be a break in the middle.
Okay.
Great. So the first slide is one here that will look hopefully familiar to you. What was it, the 27th workshop, Barbara? We have had multiple workshops discussing many of the building blocks that we've got to preparing the long-term plan. And we're now at the LTP kind of budgeting phase. This is quite a significant change compared to, as I understand it, where we were in 2021. We started much earlier, and the sequencing of the work and where we're at is actually well on track and on par with other councils, but also our own project management. So I did want to highlight that. Over this period, as Barbara's alluded to, our real focus is on calculating the budget, looking at levels of service and looking at the trade-offs, because that will all come to you again in February for decision making, and ultimately then goes through an audit process and then consultation. I have lost control of the slides, so unless I'm not... There you go. There you go. Look, Barbara alluded to this as well, and I've been involved in long-term plans, which is really scary since they were introduced in 2002. I know I don't look it, but...
Must have been a small child when you started.
Absolutely. Look, I do have some under there. Look, that was on the auditing side, but I can absolutely attest to the point that Barbara was making. This does feel like the most challenging LTP environment that any local authority has been in, or that all local authorities are in. I used to say that in my previous capacity every single LTP round, and if I have a crystal ball looking ahead to, 2027, I'll be saying it again, because actually the environment that we're operating in is incredibly fluid. There are so many changes, and the issues and challenges that we face as a council are significant, and we're having to adapt to those. But again, just reiterating some of the points that we have made previously, we have significant cost pressures that we are having to accommodate within this long-term plan. Interest and inflation costs alone are huge. At the same time, our ownership of infrastructure, we have significant infrastructure ownership, and that does cost a lot of money because our assets are at a point in their life cycle where they're of aged. They need a wee bit more love and attention in the form of investment. And, other things are being used in different ways. We have heavier vehicles. We also need to protect them and make them more resilient. So there's a lot going on in that space. So we need to do a few things, and we need to carefully look at those immediate cost pressures, prioritising and ensuring that we're making really efficient and effective choices about what we spend our money on. We're looking at rephasing our capital expenditure program to make sure that that is smoothed as much as possible. And we also need to look at the long term. Now, those are all things that you'll recall have been discussed in previous presentations by KPMG as part of their balance sheet review, and they had 4 recommendations. And in effect, this is us starting to bring all of those recommendations together. And just for Councillor Calvert, I note that those reports will be publicly released in conjunction with these slides as well. But we're certainly not the only ones facing this problem, and there's been a huge number of headlines over the recent weeks reflecting that other councils are in the midst of this process, looking at significant rates rises, and following a journey probably similar to ours. I think Councillor Brown sent me an email. Bay of Plenty Regional Council is also looking at selling its shareholding or parts of its shareholding in the port company. So we're seeing some really common trends across the sector. So that's a bit of the scene setting for the high level. I'm going to go into the budgeting process and what we've completed so far now. So I'm going to continue with that, and then I'll pause when I get to the end of that for any questions. So just to recap on the work that's been completed to date, 2 really kind of critical I guess briefings or workshops that we've held with you and meetings to start informing the development of our budget. The first was on 9th of November, where you made some decisions around some levels of service recommendations. That was primarily in response to capital expenditure or the capital program, and looking at our investment over the 10 years of this LTP. And of course, we had the presentation that Wellington Water provided on the 21st of November, looking at their options as well. So those have been really key inputs into us starting to build the budget. In terms of what we've got in our budget to date, and look, I'll jump around a wee bit here, but what we've included and attempted to do is we've tried to hold, in order to manage costs, at the baseline of this current planning year. So to manage inflation wherever possible, and I'm going to come back to that point in a minute. We looked at the committee decisions that were made on the 9th of November, and we've factored in sort of the 23-24 budget plus unavoidable cost increases for the 3 waters, so the middle option that Wellington Water provided us. At this point in time, the budgets don't have any levels of service proposals. Those aren't decisions that we as officers can make. You need to make changes to levels of service decisions, and so we'll be bringing those back to you in February. It doesn't have information on the community facilities plan. Again, it doesn't have user fees and charges. That will be a decision in February. And for the purpose of this workshop, what we are doing for 3 water reform is we're providing the full anticipated cost of 3 waters across the full 10 years of the program. Now, I'll jump to the next slide. The reason for that is we know that we need to look at the full costs, while current legislative settings is to prepare the LTPs based on 2 years and then taking it out. We need to just monitor very carefully what is going to happen in that space based on the current government's 100-day plan. So we're monitoring that. Legal advice that the sector has received suggests that we should still be complying with the law as it stands, but we are anticipating that there could be changes, and in fact we may need to prepare a dual budget throughout this process. But for now, what we've done is we've just kept those 10-year period numbers in, and we can be more nuanced when we come back to you in February. Similarly, with Let's Get Wellington moving, the current budget has those projects included in it. Again, those are decisions that the council has made, and so we've left them at this point in time. So, where did we get to? Yeah, so following the decisions made on the 9th of November committee meeting, we started building the budget, or building on the budget. That landed in a position where we had a rates increase of approximately 26%. So that was based on the current estimated cost to deliver the current levels of service. We, as an executive leadership team, made a decision that we needed to look very closely at that, and we requested a line-by-line review of all operating costs be completed right across the organisation. So all operating costs, a complete line-by-line review has been conducted with the intent of holding all budgets at the 23-24 level where possible. Now, that wasn't able to be achieved in many cases, and I'm going to talk to you about where we couldn't achieve that and the reasons why in a moment. And of course, we encouraged everyone to look at savings that wouldn't impact on levels of service, because as I've noted, decisions around levels of service are ones for you to make. That meant, as a result of undertaking that work, we were able to make adjustments of approximately 18 million, so resulted in a rates increase of 21.7% in year one of this LTP. So that was where we were sitting. I want to kind of show how that's made up, and your eyes will no doubt go straight to that big black chunk, and I'm going to come to that in a minute. But I just want you to sort of digest where the big changes are going in terms of increases to get to that 21.7%. So you can see that, and I'm just going to take you through each of those changes. So the depreciation, that forms a really material component of the rates increase. And that is, we're required to set a balanced budget. We're required to fund our depreciation, and that level of funding is then therefore used to fund our renewals program. Within that percentage of 5.5, there is an element where we're catching up on previous decisions to defer fully funding depreciation for Three Waters. So, that there's some historical decisions in there that means we're catching up a wee bit as well. Interest at 2.6%. That's a big driver for us, and so interest rates are expected to remain higher in the near future, and that will have an impact on rates more than in previous years. And there's another large chunk that I just wanted to draw your attention to before getting on to operating costs, which is 3.9%. That's based, again, on previous decisions that councillors have made to debt fund operating costs. Now, that's the impact of starting to repay the debt-funded operating costs. So those decisions were made during COVID, and those kind of decisions, lost revenue, pop-up libraries, those kind of things. So that's the cost of delivering those services now. And in terms of the operating costs, I just want to flick to this slide here. There are a couple of key drivers. So remember that, I noted we tried to hold everything at 23-24 levels in terms of our controllable operating costs. There are some of those that are just simply beyond our control. So our bulk water levy that's passed on to us via our Greater Wellington Regional Council has increased by 25%. So that automatically creates a $5.4 million amount that we need to fund. And we've got some other costs there as well. Electricity and gas is going up. We obviously have our own internal rates that we have to include as well. One thing I'd also note is that we have to offset also lost parking revenue of 7.8 million, which was included in the waterfall diagram as well. So many of those costs are things that we cannot directly control. In terms of the estimated capital program, we have looked at rephasing this as best we can. The one thing that I would note is it still remains relatively high in the first couple of years of the long-term plan, and that does reflect that we have got some significant works underway around Te Matapihi, around the town hall, and that is there's a large component in there. And just to highlight, 5 projects make up almost 50% of that estimated capital program. So I'm just wanting to highlight that there, so you get a context for what is actually sitting within that bucket. The next phase of the presentation is options to close the gap, but I wondered if there was any questions around points of clarification that would help at this point. You might be keen to get into how we're going to manage this, but
Yeah, Councillor Free.
So you mentioned an increase in the amount of rates. Is that the rates that we pay ourselves? And do we pay GST on that to the government? So is it entirely cost neutral?
Yes, that is the amount that we pay to ourselves, and we don't pay GST on it.
Okay. So if we were to increase the levy, the differential for vacant land, we may pay more in rates, but it would be offset by us collecting that amount with no difference. Yeah.
The differential for vacant land is not likely to bring in a lot of additional revenue. There are a relatively small number of properties that differential would apply to. The intent behind that differential is to signal that, as part of a signal more so than actually a revenue.
But I was worried it would have a negative effect on council because of the vacant land that we might hold.
No, not within the downtown area.
And do we pay rates on reserve land?
No.
Are there any other questions? There appear to be none.
Thank you. People are keen to know what we're going to do, right?
Well, it's a really good story, so we want to get to the end.
It's nice to know there's a happy ending.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of hard work going on. So, yes.
I just wanted to quickly acknowledge, because we may lose this point later, the work that has gone on into that reduction over a short period of time through that line-by-line work. So I just want to acknowledge Barbara and your team, because I know that is no insignificant achievement. And so I think it's really important that we acknowledge how much work has gone into that point in the story so far.
Yeah, and one thing that I neglected to mention in that, which is a really important point, is that 18 million reduction comes with, does come with risks. So if I use a context in my own finance team, we rely on some surge resource to help us manage things like ratepayer complaints at points in time when when rates invoices go out. We wouldn't have the budget to do that any longer. So what we're trying to do is think about more efficient ways we can work across the team, the wider team, to help manage that. But there could be demands on the entire team at a point in time, which means that our responses will be slower. So there are risks. We think it's worth taking those risks, but there could be consequences and heightened feedback around, non-responsiveness and those kind of things. So that's just a really good, I thought, useful example to highlight that, the $18 million it was a challenge to find, and it does come with some risks and consequences.
We have a question now from Councillor Randall.
Yep.
So I've got 2 questions. When you outlined the starting point at 26 and then the reduction with 18 million down to 21%, that doesn't include the 2% on the sludge treatment levy.
Correct, it doesn't include that. Yep.
So we need to keep adding that in, because that's also starting.
And I will come to that in the next few slides. So we've got some slides to demonstrate that. Yep.
And the second question is, while it's great that you found some savings, I was wondering if at least a list of those savings could be provided just so that we understand where the savings are sort of coming from? I mean, you've outlined there's some risk there. You know, I'm a bit concerned. I'm always concerned about making sure core services and the teams are properly funded. And so I'm just a bit. I want some understanding, I guess, where they were found rather than.
We will have a look at what we can do. We may not be able to provide a line by line because we won't have that recorded, that level of detail, but we can look at kind of general areas and we can provide that feedback, if that's okay.
I think we also do need to acknowledge that this is an operational decision, that we do not have, you know, the fact that savings have been made without a change to level of service, that is an operational decision. Thank you.
Excellent. So in terms of reducing costs and the available levers, look, this is just a reminder of what levers can be used to think about our capital cost constraints and our operating cost constraints. We've split them into two separate areas because they have different consequences. Our capital is generally financed through borrowing and increasing our debt. Our operating costs is usually funded by rates or other fees and charges. And so we do need to look at different levers to pull in different circumstances. So we have gone through, there are no new levers to pull, I can confirm that. We worked through a large number of those on the left-hand side of your screen as we worked through the 9th of November. So those were the kind of key areas that we looked at through the 9th of November decisions. And I'm going to just talk about the levers that we think can be pulled in order to decrease that 21.7% down further. So the first one of those is some organisational initiatives, and that's looking at some efficiencies that we think that as an ELT we can make to deliver our services, and we've estimated that of around $5 million. To date, in the budget, we have made the assumption that all of the additional costs will be funded via rates. We do have the option of funding some of those additional costs through fees and charges, and of course we'll be doing the review of fees and charges in February as well, and that will be workshopped with you at the 31 January, the workshop as well, so we'll have that conversation. Based on our provisional kind of quick look at that, we think that possibly an extra $5 million over and above that the inflation adjustments that we've made for fees and charges could help offset some of that rates increase as well. Thirdly, we do think that in this kind of environment there could be an option to use some of the surplus proceeds from sale of non-strategic and non-level of service delivering assets to offset some of our costs, particularly the one-off costs, because we don't want to sort of artificially kind of jump into the second year with big increases, and we've estimated that of around $8 million. Now that would be inconsistent with our Treasury policy, which notes that any kind of decrease any proceeds from the sale of assets should be used to pay down debt. You can make a decision to undertake something like this. We just need to set a special resolution if that was something that the councillors wanted to pursue. There is further options to not fully fund depreciation. I think this is John's favourite topic. So, look, we need to set a balanced budget, which means that our expenses, which include depreciation, need to be fully funded based on our revenues. So that means that we have a statutory obligation to fund our depreciation expense. At the moment, we're not doing that, and that was a historic decision because we had a significant jump in our depreciation expense as a result of a Three Waters valuation, and we decided to stagger the timing of our return to fully funding depreciation over a period of time with the intent to go to fully fund by 28-29. In these circumstances, we could look at rephasing our return to fully funding depreciation over a longer period of time, or look at options to not fund depreciation immediately on certain assets, because the intent behind that is to have a reserve or a fund that we can use to renew our assets. And there might be assets, say Tākina, that's just been built, that we don't need to immediately start to think about replacing it straight away because of the length of or the time it will take to age. We need to look at this area really carefully, and again, advice will be brought back to you in February. We're still doing work, but we think there could be a savings of approximately 10 million in that space. And further to that, we estimate that there's probably around 7 million where we can decrease levels of service. Now, those proposals will need to still be worked through. That will be worked through in January and February, and that will be provided to you for decision making in the new year. So what does all of that mean? Well, applying all of those levers would then provide you with an indicative rates increase of approximately 13.8% for 24-25. That is after growth in the ratepayer base. That does mean that you'd be accepting some greater risk, and you'd be reducing some levels of service. It's not going to be easy to achieve. It will require some really tough decision making. We've already saved as a council 45+ million over the last 4 years. So, including the current financial year, 23-24. So, we had the 2% savings target within there. So, we are always trying to tighten our belt. We're always trying to squeeze. And at some point, that will have an impact on levels of service. That's not rocket science. So we just need to be really clear on what those levels of service changes we expect to be are. If we choose not to fully fund depreciation, that will create a deficit. We'd be deliberately looking to create a deficit. I just wanted to make that point clear. And I guess the caution that I put around the 13.8% is that inherently I'm an accountant, so I always get nervous when I look to things like 13.8%. In the current financial environment, we're 7 months out from setting rates. Cost pressures will continue over those 7 months, and so those pressures will continue. To a point where we need to actually set and lock in these costs and ultimately set our rates. So this is only indicative at this point. We've got all this work to do over the coming months, but that gives you a sense of the levers that we're seeking to pull and how we would like to get down to that 13.8% at this point in time. So again, just reflecting the original 21.7 and the steps that we would be looking to take to get down to the 13.8, that is factoring in a level of growth as well of 0.6%, which is a standard assumption that we apply on an annual basis as well. So and just going to Councillor Randall's point, we can't forget the levy. So this is what the rates kind of look like over the next 10-year period. But that blue line is our attempt of modelling the levy over top of that, which would be around 2% in year one. In terms of additional costs to ratepayers. So, and I think it's a really important point that we tell that story in our financials. We'll continue to reflect in this type of graph that levy over top of it so that our ratepayers have that full picture. And last but not least, the borrowings. So really key factor here is our debt to revenue ratio. With the current capital expenditure portfolio, we wouldn't be under a 2 to 5% limit for debt to revenue for the first 6 years of the long-term plan, or we would achieve it in the first 6 years of the long-term plan, recognising we have a $272 million buffer within that, which is the grey, that is being held in case we were to experience a significant event, like a seismic event, touch wood we don't, that is being held for that purpose. And so at 225, our financial strategy is to be within the 225, including that 272. We're still under it with actual borrowings, but not within the 272 for the first 6 years of or first 5 years of the long-term plan. But we think that that's okay because we're showing a clear path to move to achieving that over time. I'm going to pause there.
Yes, Councillor Wenera.
Kia ora. Thank you for that. Just on the organisational initiatives and efficiencies, to be really clear, are we talking about job cuts?
At this point, we've got no plan for job cuts. What we're looking at is we'd need to look at pulling together what that could look like. There are a number of vacancies that we have across the organisation that could be applied in there. There could be options where our staff want to, work 9-day fortnights, for example. We do know that there is an overlap of and duplication of activities across different areas of council. So we may look to improve those efficiencies and and the effectiveness of that. But at this point in time, we don't have job cuts, underlying that at this point in time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Chung.
Great, thanks. I'm looking at cuts in OPEX, what we can do. Keeping in mind the latest information on the news about Auckland paying $7.4 million in recruiting costs, are we actually also paying recruiting agencies anything?
A couple of years ago, this was one of the efficiencies we achieved through the $45 million savings the CFO mentioned earlier. I significantly reduced the use of external recruiting agencies and built capacity in our HR team to have our own talent attraction team. So the vast majority of our recruitment is undertaken internally, and occasionally we will use an external recruiting agency when we're looking for highly specialist skills, but certainly not a significant cost in the organisation anymore.
Do you have any idea about what that would be?
I don't have it off the top of my head, no.
No, but it would not be in the millions. I can guarantee that. I know it's not within the millions. Yeah.
Councillor Randall.
If we didn't proceed with the asset sale, would that help our debt to revenue ratio? I mean, it seems that there's a jump on both sides of the ledger.
That's correct.
With that.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And look, the decisions are being made to proceed with some of those asset sales. Those were made in the 9th of November, committee decisions. So that's already factored into this debt to revenue ratio. What we're suggesting is a portion of that could be used to offset one-off costs in the current year as opposed to the debt to revenue. So that would be a decision that we'd bring back to you. Yeah.
Councillor Pannett.
Thanks for all your work. Can you just reassure me that we're not relying on hope to deal with the possibility of earthquakes, because they are going to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I would say on that is that within our insurance roadmap and the work that we're doing in our insurance roadmap is we're taking a really careful and considered approach in how we manage the risks associated with that. We are also obviously looking at creating, as part of this long-term plan, consulting on creating a perpetual investment fund to then therefore help us to have some liquid funds that could be used partially in the event of an earthquake.
The levels of service you're talking about, is that things that the community will notice, like library closures or swimming pools?
That's a really difficult question for me to answer in the abstract, because ultimately, we may propose for your consideration levels of service that is that may affect a small number of ratepayers, but they will deeply feel those cuts, as opposed to across all Wellingtonians. So I suspect that The answer is probably it depends, but we're looking to minimise the impact as much as possible in the options that we're providing to you.
And just the third question is around some of those larger costs like our transport plans, preparing for climate change, our adaptation work. We need to fund work, not just plan.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how's that? And while Let's Get Wellington Moving might be dead, there's still some things we might want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I would note is if I go, oh no, it's too far back. I won't distract you with that. No, the CapEx program that's being proposed is still significant. I don't want to lose sight of that. We're spending a lot of money investing in Wellington, and while we're trying to manage the consequences of that, an investment of $540 million in year one, into our capital program is still a significant portion.
Councillor Free.
Just about Let's Get Welly Moving, if we were, say, to scale it back, because under government directive or whatever, would that save, for example, not doing Lambton Quay, but just doing it differently, shutting the traffic off, but maybe not the digging up, would that save a lot of money?
Siobhan's going to answer.
I can answer that. It's really difficult to say. You know that you'd have to pay a considerable amount to redesign. You also wouldn't get the benefits. So the council approved the single stage business case, which was for the whole of Golden Mile. If you are then going to de-scope it, then we would have to revisit that case.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Also worth noting, it wouldn't, the rates impact would not be great because of the level of capital expenditure for the next year.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Councillor Brown.
Just a small question. If we write off assets, do we actually treat that the same way as depreciation, or is it a different type of treatment?
We don't budget for the write-off of assets, and it's capital in nature, so it doesn't offset our rates.
No, but I mean, for instance, I would argue that there was a reasonable case for writing down the value of Takina, in which case you get a lower asset value to depreciate from. So I'm just curious as to how you'd actually account for the write-off. Yep,
and it's one of the areas we're looking at possibly not funding that depreciation on that basis.
Deputy Mayor Foon.
Thank you for the mahi. Sale of surplus assets. Have you got any examples of what we might be looking at there? Thank you.
The committee made a decision around some of the buildings on the waterfront on the 9th of November, so those could be ones. There's also a number of relatively small minor buildings that we hold that that could be considered as well within that. We haven't worked that up yet, but that's kind of the intent that would look behind. They wouldn't be ones that deliver a level of service, and they wouldn't be ones that we hold for strategic purposes.
Councillor McNulty.
Thanks, Andrea. Really helpful presentation. So just want to confirm if we look not to fully fund depreciation, we're going to do it on a per asset basis and go, this asset we don't need to, this asset, rather than just trying to blanket kick it down the road.
Absolutely, and I think the rationale for that is if you choose not to fully fund depreciation, we will be asking you to make a resolution that not balancing the budget is a prudent decision, and I think you'll need rationale as to why that's the case. And so, we need to look at that quite carefully and be able to provide that advice and the rationale. So I think, one of the Takina example and the point that Councillor Brown was just asking about, making sure that we're not going to create a funding gap, that's going to cause problems, and it would be imprudent to do that. So we do need to complete that analysis and provide you with some good advice on that space.
Okay, no, it's welcome, because I imagine every council in the future will just keep kicking it down the road if we're not specific.
Yes.
Some of the projects we put back in that committee meeting, are you going to be able to quantify their increase at all for us, let's pull out, say, Otari Wilton, we chose to refund that one, so put that back in as a guest officer.
I mean, all of those decisions will have a direct impact on this debt to revenue ratio that we've got, which is under pressure, particularly for the first, we're not meeting our financial strategy for the first 5 years. I just need to make sure I'm getting my 5 or 6 years correct. Yeah. So those kind of decisions do have a direct impact on that. We haven't attempted to go back and quantify it because there were lots of unders and overs, and to do so in a period of time of pulling together this presentation we wanted to deliver a comprehensive presentation to you without that. So.
I just wanted to say I've asked for that information multiple times, and I do think when we look at the decisions to come before us, they may not have a very material impact of rates for next year. However, they do on the out years, and so I would like us to look at those things again, because when I think about probably the next level of decisions we have to make about levels of service, I anticipate they will be more challenging than the ones we had on 9th of November.
Yeah, so, and I think we can bring those back on the 9th of November. And just to acknowledge, there was other things that were discussed on the 9th of November that had OPEX cost implications, so we'll be looking at those in this advice. So, as well. Yeah.
And sorry, so if there was a perpetual insurance fund, say tomorrow, of 225 million, would the grey disappear off this graph? We would not need any debt headroom.
Yeah, that would be my recommendation to you, but we're not going to be able to achieve that straight away in year one, and we need to look at, whether or not we are going to do that. We need to go through a consultation process, so that's why at this point we're still leaving that there. Yeah.
Councillor Abdurrahman, sorry.
Cool. Thank you, Andrea. Could you please tell us if you rule out, or if it's on the table, when it comes to swimming pools, community places, and like sport activities, if they are included as part of the service level?
So that's not my decision to rule them out. What we'll be doing is bringing all these options to you in February for you as elected members to make the decisions on. Yeah.
So to be clear, what we're talking about is all those are on the table for decisions.
I think there's many options out on the table for decisions, and we have to, we'll have to bring those. We have to work through all of those. I can't rule anything out at this point in time.
The reason I'm asking is you put a number 7 million because at least you have an idea of maybe 2% from this service, whatever. Could you just tell us 1 or 2 things at least that you have thought about?
So what's within that? There was a couple of things that are internal levels of service. So, for example, if people pay by credit card, the fees attached to the credit card transaction, while they may pay the fees at the parking meter directly, and some other services we pay the fees. And so we would look at a consistent approach where if someone chooses to use their credit card, there would be suitable alternatives to pay, then they should pay the credit card fee. So there's a level of consistency and relatively minor. Those are internal considerations that we're making, and that makes up, those kind of initiatives actually make up a relatively large chunk of that 7 million. In terms of the other options within the 7 million, I'm trying to even think of some options.
I think probably through you, Chair, the point we're making is that we've suggested a target number that levels of service reductions could achieve for us, but the staff are not sitting here today with our own special list. We need to work that through with elected members, with the Mayor's office, and come back to you with advice in February. But my experience in levels of service reviews is they can be as broad as the elected members around this table wish the review to be. And the question as to whether members of the public will notice a reduction in level of service, yes, absolutely. Because these are external levels of service we deliver now, and it's always difficult to suggest a reduction to any of them. There will always be a group of people in the community that value a particular service, at the level we currently deliver it. The key is we've worked extremely hard to find ways to reduce cost within the organisation and avoid a much bigger target for external level of service reduction. And that's what we'll continue to do.
So
I just want to make one other point, sorry, before we go back to your questions, and I think that would be that we will have a package of savings. We have the option to support those or not, and if not, to come up with other savings or to impose a higher rates increase than what we're looking at. And those are the options before us as they are before every other council. And, so as a group, that's where we will need to land on one of those. Sorry, Councillor Abdurrahman, you had more question?
Cool, Andrea. My second question is, as that part of level of service, are you intending to bring like paid parking in suburbs like Newtown and Berhampur?
Again,
it's not off the table.
Reflecting.
I think this has been asked and answered, that we don't have specific lists of things.
No, what I'm asking is if this is off the table or still on the table.
I think this has been asked and answered about that things are not on or off the table at this point.
Madam Chair, with all due respect, let the officer respond if she thinks...
It has been answered, Councillor.
Okay.
So have you got another question?
Thank you, I'm done.
Okay. All right, now does anybody who hasn't asked a question, because I've got second round? Okay. Deputy Mayor Foon.
Just in response to the increase in utilities, so the gas in particular, with the electrification of pools, is that something that would make quite a big difference to that?
Yes, likely to. That would be one of the criteria that we kind of looked at in the 9th of November to invest to kind of save, options. So invest some capital expenditure to change, because then we could save operational costs further down the track. So yes.
Okay, so is that one you would bring advice back for?
We can certainly bring advice back on that one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Free.
I'm wondering if there's any potential for saving in the city promotion space or the economic sort of spend space, given that we're funding Takina, we're funding Akutangi, we've got quite a lot of overheads going on in that space. Is there any opportunity to maybe shut something down that isn't performing as well or used as much? Because I feel as if we've got to take a pencil somewhere, and even if it was a temporary closure.
I think you might remember on the 9th of November you agreed to drop, I think, the grant to Wellington NZ by $1 million, and they need to work out exactly how would that flow through in terms of their service delivery. So to go beyond that,
it's quite hard, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is quite hard.
Okay.
But again, that could be a conversation in February, depending on where you've got to.
Yeah, okay.
Councillor Chung.
Again, looking at savings, do we have any sacred cows there that we don't want to look at? Now, for example, what's the appetite for having a salary cap, or not replacing staff that actually leave, or looking at the projects that we've actually approved up to now? For example, a big example is the zero waste. We could delay those projects even though they have been approved.
Look, I think through you, Chair, in terms of external levels of service, the question we would have for the council is, what is your appetite? Do you have areas that you don't wish to reduce, and do you have areas that you would like us to look at? And if there are any ideas, please do let the team know, because we'll be working on bringing advice back to you in the new year. In terms of the management of staff cost, that is something that I oversee as the employer of the staff, and we manage that process carefully. It's not a matter I would necessarily discuss in a public briefing with you. But just to give you an idea, there are a number of vacancies we've carried in the organisation for a while. We have already taken those vacancies out of the organisation as part of the savings we've delivered to you today. We certainly do look at every single vacancy in the organisation. We're tightening up on our central processes on how we review the business case for the replacement of every vacancy. For example, when I had a member of the executive leadership team leave recently, I rolled that role into another role and did not replace that vacancy. Those kinds of things happen as an ongoing part of our drive to be an efficient organisation. But certainly one principle we do have is that we pay our staff fairly for the work that they do.
Deputy Mayor Foon, do you have another question? Oh, you were just judging your hair. All right, it looks good. We don't. Oh, Councillor Apanovich, sorry.
Thanks. Just my second most favourite subject, Civic Square and the cab building. That sits in there at 7 million, which is straight OPEX and debt funded. So if we delayed that, if the ability to delay that, would that have an impact on the rates increase?
Yes, well, it wouldn't be. We're currently debt funding it, so it wouldn't have an impact on the rates increase, but I'll let James answer.
It's required to be done in the timeframe to fit with the town hall. The money that Andrea is talking about is dependent on the methodology of the demolition that we go with. So the other day we talked about there's the fast and furious nibbler option that wouldn't necessarily require that money if we did that. But we just need to think about what are the implications of using that option first.
Councillor Calvert, you have a question?
Yes, thanks. This is probably more about next steps, and probably a question for the Mayor. How will we come together as a council and try and get some consensus around what needs to be cut, what needs to be saved, what needs to be increased, in terms of having a package for February, rather than just a proposal via meeting, a public meeting with a few days' notice?
Thanks, Councillor. We'll come back to that question after we hear about the next steps. Councillor Randall, sorry.
Yes, I guess this is sort of along similar lines. This information is not really available in budget terms, line item budget. So you haven't yet got. Have you got the information versus the long-term plan? What the new long-term plan would look like, so we can compare it with the current long-term plan?
No, we don't at this point have that information in a comparable level. We have been working really hard to actually bring these numbers together. So the next few weeks ahead will be a really busy time for my finance team, who will now be plugging in all these numbers. As you can see, we've made some significant reductions to budgets, and we need to flow all those through our system before we can then kind of produce it in some format that looks consistent with what we've got. And that's the next phase of the process that we need to go to capture all of this.
Yes, and so, I do thank you. I know it's an enormous effort to do this, and I think one of the advantages of us starting early means that we are still okay to get all that information through before we consider it. Can you, when that information is pulled together, as soon as it's pulled together, are you able to share that with councillors, even though it might be over the break?
Yes, we can certainly share at an activity level. That was the intention. We just didn't have the information available for today in that format.
I think
but we can do that, and Yeah.
I think activity level budgets will be available in February, so I don't think you should expect them before then. Councillor Free?
Just a quick one. A while ago, we resolved that we would encourage, we would make it easier somehow for people to buy their own little pieces of encroachment land. Has there been any further work as to how we could just make that process simpler? And how much money would we be talking about?
I can answer that. We have looked at that. If we can make it simpler, the process is dictated by legislation. You can't actually make it any easier. When we looked at how much land was potential. You can only sell it to the adjacent landowner, so it really depends on their appetite, and a lot of that land isn't actually suitable for development. So we've looked quite thoroughly into that. We don't think there's a lot of potential there.
But even just people knowing the quantum that it might cost, it's all sort of very untransparent at the moment.
No, there's a lot of information on the website
Okay.
in terms of the process that has to be followed through. So, yeah.
Okay, we are now going to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and do the final section. On to the next section, which is to hear about the next steps. And I think I'm going to Baz and Lloyd.
You are indeed. Good afternoon, everyone. Look, we don't have a lot of slides. We have about 4 or 5 slides, so the second session will be reasonably quick, I assume. And in essence, the focus of this part of the presentation is just to talk through what next year looks like, and just to talk through that in a little bit of detail, and also talk about how the consultation document is shaping up. Recognising that key decisions still need to be made in February, so that'll of course help shape the consultation document as well. So those are the key dates in front of you. So we've got a workshop with you again. I think it is the 31st of Jan, as Barbara highlighted, and that's in essence to work through what will be going to committee on the 15th of February. Then in essence, after the key decisions are made on the 15th of February, we go away and prepare a consultation document that meets our legislative requirements. That gets considered by committee on 13 March. It then goes for audit approval and then gets adopted on the 9th of April. After that, it's the standard consultation period. We go out for just over a month, have hearings, and then we consider and analyse all the feedback that we've heard from the community. And then there is a final deliberations, we refer to it. So that's in 30 May, where we consider all the feedback from the community and come to final decisions. That's when we go back to audit. They review the final LTP that then gets adopted on 26 June. It is worth highlighting that there's a lot of dates and a lot of meetings up on the screen, but there are actually 2 meetings that are most pertinent for you, because these are the key budgeting decision points for consultation, right? So the 15th of February is in essence when we start finalising the budget. You look at user fees and charges, the revenue and financing policy, the financial strategy, infrastructure strategy, and in essence the key issues that go out for consultation. So that's the key decision point for you next year in terms of creating the draft consultation document that goes out for community consultation. There are other meetings, like I said before, where you consider and look at the CD and then adopt the CD, but that is to reflect the decisions from this meeting. And so your ability to make decisions after this point don't really re-emerge until 31 May after you've gone out for consultation. So it's important to recognise that those are the key decision points for you next year. I'll hand over to Lloyd. He's just going to talk to you through the CD in terms of how that's shaping up and outline what the requirements are from legislation.
Afternoon, councillors. I'll just take you through some of these slides. I won't read them all out. Since you'll get them, you can look at. There's a bit of detail in there for you, more for your background information. Just to make the point that in terms of the development of the consultation document, that happens in parallel with this process we've got going underway, because one informs the other. What are the key issues that you want to take to the public for consultation is going to be determined by how the budget shapes up. So these two things happen in parallel. So what I'll talk about today is just the pathway that we're on at the moment, where we're at that pathway, recognising that there's still more water to go under the bridge in terms of the development of the document itself. I've just put up there in terms of the consultation document, and I won't go through the Local Government Act itself, just to say it is actually quite onerous in terms of what you can put into the consultation document. Just remembering that you don't take a fully blown plan to the public. That would be predetermination. You need to take the components, the important components of that plan, so people can have a say, and then they come back and you bring them all together and develop the plan then. That's quite an important principle in the Act itself. So that's also why you'll see some of the consultation, the significant decisions which we talk about in the consultation document have to have options available to them, so people can see what are the various options relating to that decision. Obviously you'll indicate a preferred option in there, but there needs to be a suite of options which are credible options sitting there, and they need to be costed as well and have all the required supporting information sitting behind them so people can see where they got to in that whole process. And the auditors obviously are all over that document in some detail in the process, and they operate as a check in terms of the quality of the information that's put there and whether in fact it's meeting the statutory requirements itself. So in the consultation document, or the CD, you'll see the key significant decisions for the long-term plan, and we'll also communicate the forward view as well. What does the forward view look like? What are some of the key strategies and policies which might be included in the budget itself, so people can get a view of what the 10-year plan looks like. So that's broadly the overview of it. As we go through, we actually apply a structured process to determining what is a significant decision, and we look at a whole range of things there as we go along, and some of the things that we look at sitting in there relate to any changes in ownership of, say, a key asset listed in our significance and engagement policy, which puts a boundary around what are the sorts of things that we actually need to consult on. Any significant change in level of service as well. Those would be two things, for example, that we would consider. In terms of the key decisions at the moment, or significant decisions at the moment that we've got on the table, there are three of them, and you're familiar with all of them sitting there: the airport shares, zero waste, and the future Te Nakau. Those are the three ones which are sitting there at the moment. Obviously, I made the point before, this has been developed in tandem with the budgeting process, so there may or may not be other things that come in or out of that, depending on the decisions that you make sitting in there. So those are if you like, the three decisions that we're working up at the moment as we work through. And just to go to the final slide, I'm happy to take questions after that itself as well. There are other items which we can consider, get general feedback on, but we will be asking for feedback on things like fees and charges, the revenue and finance policy, the overall budgeting settings and so on. All of those things will be in there, and if we went to test some feedback from the public on things which are not significant but we might consider worthy of testing feedback, those can be put in as well. And again, those things will be focused on and developed up over the next phase as we go into the next phase of the budget itself. We will also make disclosures around uncertainties in there, so the uncertainties around Three Waters at the time of consultation, what that looks like, and obviously, no pun intended, there's a lot more water to go under the bridge on that one, but by the time we get to the point of consultation, we might have a bit more clarity. There may be some uncertainty sitting there which we still need to disclose, and of course the auditors will be asking us to do that as well, so people know what the grey areas are in those decisions themselves. The state of Let's Get Welly Moving is another one which has a considerable amount of uncertainty sitting around it. So any decision which has a level of uncertainty sitting around it, we would actually have to talk about that, what it is and how we're responding to it itself. Just remembering the significant decisions are those which have a significant impact on the 10-year budget itself. We are, at the end of the day, producing a 10-year plan. And whilst there are parts of that 10-year plan which have significant impacts, you've been looking at years 1 and 2, in particular in relation to the rates rises, it is the 10-year plan that we are producing. So I'll just stop there and we can answer some questions.
Yeah, before we go, I do have a list of questions, but before I go to them, I'll go to the Mayor, who's going to maybe briefly outline some of her thoughts about the process ahead of the 15th of February meeting.
Yeah, thank you, officers, for this process. This is really good. So keeping that in mind, what we've just been presented with, so following the workshop in late Jan, we'll run a little survey with councillors to see if that helps weight certain bits of information, and then essentially move into, we've got a couple of weeks to do some either group sessions or one-on-one, whatever's more useful. What I'm thinking is there are a couple of things that worked well with the priorities one a while ago, and then the last decision that we make. I'm essentially taking the lessons from both of those to fit into this process. So that will probably mean a lot more back and forth between my team and councillors, like we did with the big priorities document, but also including a couple of engagement tools like the survey
from the other decision.
Thank you, Mayor Whānau. Okay, so I have some questions. Councillor Free.
Yeah, I saw three big items that you mentioned for consultation in the LTP, but I wonder, I would really advocate for putting in a transport-related one because of the decision around Golden Mile. I don't know if many people realise that means we haven't got much money for city streets, which means not much money for bus priority. And I honestly think that should be tested with the public as to what they think, given that there's a lot of movement in the transport plans, and it would be really good to get Wellingtonians' feedback, I think. So I would make a plug for that. I'm not quite sure if we're going to have the opportunity to ask later, so I'm asking now.
I think it'll be around the decisions, though, so I'm not quite clear what the big decision would be that we would be asking for public approval on.
Well, I guess it would be, have we got the balance right of the spending that we have put into this LTP? Because one thing I noticed was there's hardly anything left for city streets. We really cut that money out to fund Thorndon Quay and the Golden Mile. Is that actually the best thing to do? We heard from Greg Pollock today that you could do a lot with Lambton Quay from just traffic management, stopping traffic. We lost about 40 million.
Okay, I think Siobhan is ready to respond.
So those decisions have already been made. So in terms of the traffic resolution for Thorndon Quay Hut Road, for Golden Mile, you've had the business case, which was essentially consulted on. You've had the traffic resolutions that have been consulted on. So those decisions have already been widely consulted and the decision made by council.
I thought it was a little disingenuous to even include that we've got funding for city streets when it's down at nothing, pretty much nothing.
It's not nothing, I'll have to check, but it's tens of millions.
We're getting into a debate. So
all right,
if you've got any other questions?
If nobody, I think it's a really important thing we should be asking.
I think it's very clear that we're not actually adding to the consultation document here. The consultation document will be based on the decisions that we make and their priority, and their importance to the public. So I think you're prefiguring a decision that hasn't been made, Councillor, and wanting it to be, or has been made.
Also, probably haven't been made yet.
We've canvassed it. Councillor Pennant.
Thank you for your work. We always get into that issue with consultation. If someone comes back to us with a really great idea, then we'd need to go out and reconsult, particularly if it's a big idea. So how do you sort of think we might deal with that?
So it all comes down to the significance of the change and what kind of information you hold from in the community to be able to make that decision. So hypothetically, yes, it's a real problem, but in terms of a real one, it'd be good to have an example to talk through. So the reality is when you're consulting on the LTP, you're consulting on the major matters, the key proposals, and any supporting information. If there is a completely left field proposal that has support that we have no understanding in terms of community views on, then that is potentially something that you would have to take out to consultation. But it's like I said before, it's not a problem that comes up very often.
Well, for example, then if someone came with a proposal for the city to buy land under earthquake-prone buildings to help with the strengthening costs, how would you deal with that?
Once again, it's something that we'd have to go back and test against the significance and engagement policy, test against what kind of community views we understand and know through previous consultations. Once again, the test in legislation, and I can turn to Beth, perhaps she can provide more detail in this space, but your ability to make decisions is based on what your understanding of community views in that space. Normally we go out and test that if we haven't done any consultation, but it is subject to our understanding of community views in that space.
And Councillor, if, for example, the one that you've given, it may well be asking officers to go away and report back on it in, whether it comes forward in an annual plan or something else, but, there is a way of further investigating those sorts of ideas with the pros and cons around it and, the ability to make other decisions further out. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Okay, thanks. And just my other question is around transport. I'd like to support Councillor Free there about just, given we have a new government, and with different priorities, what scope is there to actually look at all of the work that we are doing to make sure that, given we only have a certain amount of money, we might not get what we want from the government. It's important to me that we spend what we have really well, irrespective of what decisions have been made.
So I think this was talked about just previously. So in essence, the consultation on the CD is about the key proposals that we have for the next 10 years, and so that has to be the focus of the consultation. So if you go back to the last LTP, I think we had like 5 or 6 key proposals, and for each of those proposals we had options, and that's in essence how you build a consultation document around the LTP. That's the legislative requirements, that's what's audited. There will be supporting information, of course, that people can provide feedback on, but it is quite prescribed in terms of legislation. You have to have a proposal.
So sorry, just to be really clear, is there any scope to look at what money we've got and what we want to do in the transport space?
That's the entire LTP process. So what we are talking about is matters of emphasis in the consultation document which are related to big choices that we have in front of us. In terms of the entire budget and priorities, the public can have their say on any of them.
Yeah, but transport is a critical one, so this
has been well and truly canvassed.
I don't understand, and I'm not entirely happy with the answer that I'm getting. All I'm saying is that we need to look at our budget, given there's been a change in direction.
That is the entire LTP process. Deputy Mayor Foon.
Yeah, just with the Citizens' Assembly, how will we share that narrative through the consultation document?
So this was covered off last time as well. So we obviously ran the Citizens' Assembly. That's finished and complete. Some of them have shown an interest to continue to be involved. We'll certainly be circulating all the information, and would of course receive, happily receive any feedback from them.
Councillor Abdurrahman.
Cool. Probably this is also for the mayor as well. And Mayor, you said we need to be having some discussion in late January through maybe the survey as well. How are we going to have that survey when we don't have what is going to be, example, to the level of services that's coming in February? Are we going to provide the mayor at that stage where we can have an input into it? If not, why not?
Stephen's going to answer that one.
I think through that workshop at the end of January, that's when you would see those levels of service options, and socialising that before it obviously comes through on the 15th of February. So you would have it at that time.
So probably the mayor's survey will be coming late than, you're sending through late.
We will make sure those two timeframes align.
Yeah, I had assumed like a day after the workshop, perhaps. Once we've been presented with the information, then we can input based on our own councillor priorities.
Cool, and that is a good thing. But the other thing is, if we want to frame it, this is our long-term plan budget led by you, Mayor. So if we wanted to frame it in a way, like giving an example of councillors free and Panet's example, if we want to put this in that places, how are we going to feed into it when it's going to have a big impact in the whole consultation, like the example mentioned? How are we going to feed into it?
Through you, Chair, ultimately the way you direct us is through your public debate and by resolution of this committee. So that is how I'm directed, and then I direct my team to work accordingly. And we certainly welcome any suggestions elected members wish to make to us in the meantime, but we have had a significant number of workshops where we've discussed these kinds of issues, and we'll continue to do so, recognising, of course, it's not easy.
Perhaps could I just add something else to Baz's earlier answer around, kind of the consultation issues, the kind of the big decisions. Typically, councils would really only have 3 or 4 at the very most. So last time round, we had 5, which was a bit of an exception, actually. So, it's what are those big key decisions that we are asking for feedback from the community over that kind of 10-year time horizon, which is really, the ones that we've identified. From our perspective anyway, that's kind of the ones that we would see. Where, there's a clear proposal, a preferred option, and, the analysis around what alternative options are there. So there's a lot of work that goes into that, and actually the fewer that you do in terms of putting that out for consultation, the easier that is actually for, the community to get their heads around it, but all of the processes that we have to go through with audits and what have you to actually arrive at that sort of place.
Yeah, and it would just be worth pointing out that that is driven by legislation. So originally, you used to put out a draft of the entire LTP, and the feedback from the community was that it was just too big and too hard to engage with, right? And so, as a consequence, central government changed legislation that requires us to lift out the major and significant matters for community consultation. So they really require us to sharpen the pen and focus on only those core things that go out for consultation, and that's the bit that is audited. Now, that doesn't mean that all the supporting information isn't available and people can provide feedback on it. But in terms of the CD itself, there are requirements around it, and that's the bit that's audited. And as Stephen outlined, the industry best practices that you're talking about 3 to 5 major issues is pretty common across most cities.
Last question, Madam Chair. So if we want to avoid some level of not wasting your time as well, example, if we say this is a red line, we don't want this to be reviewed in case of level of service. Say if councillors agreed, we don't want swimming to be touched and the community service to be touched. And instead of you doing all that things, later on we're going to vote it down. Isn't a better way we can feed into it that this is no go, just maybe find some other areas? How are we going to do that?
That's the process for what the Mayor's described, the workshop, the follow-up, and obviously on the 15th when you actually make those decisions as an elected council.
So if we don't put them in the plan, they won't go out to the public for consultation. Sorry, and I can see Councillor Pennant and Councillor Free, you were annoyed with me. I guess I'm just, no, okay, well, I guess what I maybe didn't make clear is that if we have a big decision on transport, if there is one made on the 15th of February, then that may take precedence in terms of what is consulted on. But at the moment, we don't have that. I can put you back on the list, Councillor Pennant. Councillor Chung.
Back to those 3 items up for consultation. On the last one, you have there the basement car park. My recollection of that was that we now had approval to actually use that as a car park again. So why is that back on the list? Is that correct? The basement car park.
Oh, that's a different car park. You're talking about Frank Kitts versus Te Nākau.
I'm talking about the Frank Kitts car park. Yeah. Okay. Is that one going to be reopened, or has it been reopened?
I can't answer that one. I might hand that to Siobhan to answer.
I don't know if it's.
We might have to come back to you. Yeah.
Councillor Randall.
Yes, I just wanted to note that you've said that both Let's Get On and Moving the 3 Waters are sort of big question marks at the moment. I've got 2 questions. First of all, if the government it becomes clearer what the government direction is in either or both of those, such that it will affect the long-term plan significantly, will officers then consider putting them up as significant decisions in the long-term plan?
The answer is going to...
He's on my side.
Yes, God has spoken.
I think you just got your answer, Councillor. I think obviously what we talked about there is uncertainties, and yes, they are uncertain at the moment. If they become more certain and more significant against the significance engagement policy, for example, and so on, then we'd have to look at that, obviously, in that respect. So we put them there at the moment because they are uncertainties and they can have a significant impact, but none of us has the answer at the moment. If we go into a consultation process where there is still uncertainty, then we'd have to declare that So anybody looking at a decision could see what the uncertainties might be around that decision and therefore take that into account.
Okay. If a councillor or councillors wish to have officers consider another topic, such as let's get Wellington moving as a significant decision, what's the process under which they can ask officers to put due consideration towards it?
Ultimately, we just assess the decisions that you make through committee, right? And so we rely on the significance and engagement policy to determine significance. That's a policy that exists. You've already agreed it. It's on our website. It talks to our strategic assets and how we determine significance. And that's the tool that we use to determine whether something goes into the CD, has option and gets audited. So it's quite formulaic and it's also prescribed.
Okay.
Having said that, Councillor, one of the things that we do is, I made the point before, we're developing this in tandem with the budgeting process. So we do look at everything as it comes through against a significant engagement policy. So it's an iterative, ongoing process. We're not just taking one and looking at that. We're looking at the whole suite of things in front of us and seeing whether, in fact, they sway into that those criteria or not.
Okay. And just one more question, really, just to help councillors. If any councillor, and this might be more for Andrea as for yourselves, if any councillor wants to get a funding impact on perhaps a key proposal, and I'll just use the example that Councillor Free outlined, that postponing the Golden Mile major investment, can councillors get some officer support about the impact of that would have on either the capital or the rates increases?
Yes is the short answer, recognising that there is resource constraints across my team. So if we had, 800 requests, we'd struggle. But I think the best way to deal with this is to make sure that the work that my team are doing is focused in the right areas. So, running through the mayor's process that she's outlined, those things that, could be possibly included within that, we'd prioritise those by default. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Calvert.
Hopefully you can hear me. There's lots of hail going on out here. What's I going to say? Oh, last LTP, council officers ran a survey across a demographic relevant to the city. Is that being planned this time round?
Yes. That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And just in terms of, would it be any different to how it was run last time, or along the same lines?
Generally, we run it along the same lines. So through LTPs, we tend to mirror the consultation questions through a representative sample survey that the research team runs.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Free.
So I'll get off the transport one, but thank you for some of the useful suggestions from my colleagues. Yeah, so the housing, just what's been included in the budget, has the money for what we need to spend on Te Mahana, the upgrades and what have you, has that been budgeted for in our LTP? And how much? Because that's a reasonable chunk.
Yes, it has. Our obligations that we are required to fulfil has been budgeted, and that's around 400 million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and
the slide deck, I think, under those significant capital projects.
I'm really just checking. Right. And the other thing is I saw that there was no budget for community facility upgrades or something. Can you say a little bit more about that? It hadn't been included.
Yes, so we do need to run those through the numbers, although in the first 3 years I think they're relatively immaterial costs that would be applied, and the main costs come in the latter years, reflecting that, of course, if I'm understanding it correct, the community facilities plan was over a period of 30 years. So yes, that is yet to be flowed through.
Okay, that's from me.
Thank you. Councillor Pannett.
Just to clarify, I'm not annoyed, just a little bit frustrated. So, and maybe it's a question for the Mayor, that in this workshop or whatever at the beginning of next year, will we have time to talk about how we respond to a government agenda? Not an agenda I supported, obviously, but nevertheless, they're there. Because it seems to me we do need to look at what we're doing now, not wait until they might release something, because they've done their 100-day plan. Thanks.
Yes, but we may not have a lot more detail about what that government, those government agendas are at that point, given the close down. I mean, we have to keep nimble in terms of.
Yeah. So I'd say yes when we can. Still very much waiting on the policy direction.
So hopefully not labouring the point too much, but they have said some very strong things around transport, which obviously some of us disagree with. So I'm just concerned about how we allocate what money we've got. So it would just signalling it would be helpful if we could have that discussion in January or at the beginning of February. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any more questions, councillors? Deputy Mayor Fung.
Yeah, just around the future of Te Ngākau, just wanting to understand do we know what decisions we'll be asked to make, and how will that, knowing that we've had the workshop, but just what does the jump look like from here to going out to make decisions?
I think it's quite a jump, Councillor, quite frankly. There's a lot of potential information that could be gathered in order to shape that up. So I think it really depends on what we're able to achieve over the next couple of months. And then I think we'll have to come back and consider what actually can be put forward in a...
Thank you. Can I also just remind everyone that the Te Ngākau development plan that I've been asked to deliver to the council isn't due until the end of June next year. So much of the work we're doing on Te Ngākau will be attributable to the next long-term plan and not this one. But in the next 3 years, the huge focus is on finishing the work that we're undertaking now and creating a clear plan of development for the future. And we also hope that the current market testing in terms of the mob and cab sites will produce opportunities for development that do not require council funding. And so the public will see a lot happening there, but there is a longer term plan to undertake.
We appear to be out of questions, and everybody has had all of their questions answered. I would like to thank the team for all of the work, significant amount of work that has gone into getting us to this point of today's briefing, and look forward to getting into it again next year. Thank you all.